The morning I realized my son had stolen control of my life, I was standing in my own kitchen trying to buy groceries online. My banking password failed 3 times. Then my phone locked me out. Then my email recovery code went to Ethan's number instead of mine. When I asked my son what was happening, he looked at me calmly and said, "Mom, you don't need to worry about money anymore. I'm handling everything now." I wish I could explain the feeling that went through me in that moment. It wasn't anger first, it was fear. Because the way he smiled at me felt like I was no longer his mother. But Ethan forgot something. There was one account his father made sure he would never find. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart, let me know in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from tonight. I always read your stories because sometimes strangers understand our pain better than family does. If this story touches you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with me until the end. My husband Daniel used to say that trust was the most expensive thing a family could own. Not a house, not retirement savings, not land. Trust. And for almost 40 years, I believed our family had plenty of it. I met Daniel Phillips when I was 23 years old and working at a small accounting office outside Columbus, Ohio. He was patient in a way most men weren't anymore. Quiet. Thoughtful. The kind of man who listened all the way through your sentence before speaking. We built our life carefully together. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant, but stable, safe. We raised our son Ethan in a brick 2-story home with a maple tree in the front yard and creaky hardwood floors Daniel always promised to replace someday. He never did, and now I'm grateful for that because every squeak in those floors still sounds like him walking through the house. Ethan was a sweet child, truly sweet. People always say mothers ignore warning signs, but there were no warning signs back then. He hugged me in public long after boys usually stop doing that. He helped Daniel shovel snow in winter without complaining. When Daniel worked late, Ethan would sit beside me on the couch eating microwave popcorn and asking questions about everything. Why do people lie? Why do old people get lonely? Why do banks close on Sundays? He had such a soft heart as a boy. That's what made all of this harder to understand. Even after he graduated college and started working in finance, Ethan stayed close to us. He called every Sunday morning. He took Daniel fishing twice a year. He remembered birthdays without reminders. When Daniel got sick the first time, Ethan drove 3 hours through a snowstorm just to sit beside his hospital bed. That memory haunted me later, because I kept asking myself how a son like that becomes a man capable of taking away his mother's independence. The change didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, quietly, like water damage inside walls. You don't notice it until the structure starts collapsing. Everything shifted after Ethan married Vanessa. Now I want to be fair when I tell this story. I know mothers-in-law often get blamed for disliking their sons' wives. Maybe sometimes that criticism is deserved. But from the very beginning, Vanessa looked at life like it was a competition nobody else knew they were playing. She was beautiful in a polished, expensive way. Perfect white teeth. Perfect hair. Perfect little laughs that never reached her eyes. At our first family dinner together, she asked Daniel what our home was worth before dessert even arrived. I remember the exact moment because Daniel almost choked on iced tea. Vanessa laughed and said, "Oh, relax. I work in real estate. I always notice property values." Daniel smiled politely, but later that night while we loaded dishes into the dishwasher, he quietly said, "That girl calculates people." At the time, I told him he was being too harsh. I wish I hadn't. After the wedding, Ethan started changing in little ways. Not cruel ways at first. professional ways. Every conversation somehow became about liability investments, estate planning scams, targeting seniors, or protecting assets. One afternoon, while helping me set up a new laptop, Ethan casually asked, "Do you still keep most of your savings in the same accounts?" I laughed and said, "What is this, an audit?" But he didn't laugh back. "You have to be careful at your age, Mom." At your age. It was the first time those words stung. Not because I feared getting older, because suddenly my son was speaking to me like I was a client instead of his mother. Vanessa started doing it too. She would bring articles about elderly fraud to dinner. She'd mention stories about dementia over coffee. She constantly framed concern as kindness. You'd be shocked how quickly confusion can happen after 65. Retired people are easy targets. One wrong click online and everything disappears. At first, I believed she cared about me. Why wouldn't I? That's the dangerous thing about manipulation. It rarely arrives wearing cruelty first. It arrives wearing concern. Daniel noticed more than I did. One night after Ethan and Vanessa left our house, Daniel stayed quiet for a very long time while wiping down the kitchen counter. Finally, he said, "Promise me something. What if anything ever feels wrong financially after I'm gone? Don't sign anything quickly." I laughed softly. "Daniel, you talk like you're planning to disappear tomorrow." But he didn't smile. Instead, he looked at me with this strange sadness I didn't understand at the time. "I'm serious, Kelly," I promised him. A year later, Daniel died from heart failure 2 weeks before Christmas. I still cannot fully describe what losing him did to me. When you've loved someone for 40 years, their absence becomes physical. It sits at the table with you, sleeps beside you, walks through grocery store aisles behind you. Grief changes the temperature of a home. And after Daniel died, Ethan stepped in immediately. At first I was grateful. He handled paperwork, insurance calls, bank appointments, probate documents. I remember crying in the kitchen while Ethan held me and said, "Dad made sure you'd always be taken care of." Those words comforted me then. Now they sound different in my memory, because eventually Ethan started asking for access. Small things at first. "Mom, let me help monitor your accounts online." "Mom, give me your passwords in case of emergencies." "Mom, let me organize your bills digitally." And because grief makes people tired, so unbelievably tired, I agreed. I told myself this was what good sons did. I ignored the tiny discomfort building inside me each time Vanessa asked another question. How much was left on the mortgage? Who was listed as beneficiary? Did Daniel leave investment accounts? Was the house fully paid off? Did I have long-term care insurance? Sometimes she asked so casually it almost sounded accidental, but not quite. One afternoon, I walked into the dining room while Vanessa and Ethan were whispering. The conversation stopped immediately. Vanessa smiled too quickly. Ethan suddenly asked if I wanted coffee. That was the first moment something cold moved through my chest. Not suspicion exactly, just instinct. The kind women our age learn after surviving enough life. Still, I pushed the feeling away, because the alternative was too painful. The alternative meant believing my own son might be looking at my life not as family, but as assets. And deep down, I think part of me already knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The fall itself wasn't dramatic. That's the strange thing about moments that change your life forever. Sometimes they arrive quietly. I slipped reaching for a soup pot on the top shelf in my kitchen pantry. One second I was standing on a small wooden stool, and the next my ankle twisted beneath me. I hit the floor hard enough to knock the breath from my chest. For a moment I just lay there staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. I remember feeling embarrassed more than hurt. That's what aging does sometimes. It makes humiliation arrive before pain. I eventually managed to crawl to the counter and pull myself upright enough to call Ethan. He answered immediately. "Mom." "What happened?" "I'm all right," I said too quickly. "I just fell a little. I'm coming." Less than 30 minutes later, Ethan and Vanessa rushed through my front door looking more alarmed than I felt. Vanessa immediately knelt beside me. "Oh my God. Kelly, why didn't you call an ambulance?" "I'm fine," I insisted. But Ethan was already grabbing his car keys again. "No argument. We're going to the hospital." At the emergency room, everything started moving faster than I could process. Nurses, forms, questions, bright fluorescent lights that made everyone look exhausted. The doctor told me I had a mild sprain dehydration and elevated blood pressure from stress. They wanted to keep me overnight for observation because of my age. My age. Again those words. Not Kelly, not Mom. Just another elderly woman doctors worried might become a liability. Ethan stayed by my bedside almost the entire evening. He looked genuinely concerned, which confused me later when I replayed those memories in my head. Because some parts of him still seemed real, still seemed like my son. Vanessa, however, treated the hospital room like a business meeting. She spoke to nurses before I could answer questions myself. She gets forgetful when she's stressed. She's been overwhelmed since Daniel died. She has trouble keeping track of medication sometimes. I stared at her in disbelief. "That's not true," I said quietly. Vanessa gave me a sympathetic smile that made my stomach tighten. "Oh, Kelly, nobody's judging you. Nobody's judging you." That sentence stayed with me because it sounded less like reassurance and more like preparation. Late that night, Ethan pulled a chair close to my bed. "You scared me today, Mom." "I scared myself too," I admitted. He rubbed his hands together nervously before speaking again. "There's something we should probably do temporarily, just until you're fully back on your feet." I should have listened to the warning bells inside me, but exhaustion is dangerous. Grief is dangerous. Loneliness is dangerous. Especially when trust already exists. Ethan handed me a folder. "Just temporary financial authorization stuff," he explained. "In case bills need to be paid while you recover." I barely looked at the papers. I trusted him. God help me. I trusted him completely. Where do I sign? Even now, remembering that moment makes me feel sick. Because I can still see the relief that flashed across Ethan's face. Not concern. Relief. Vanessa leaned over the bed and squeezed my shoulder. "This is for your protection," I signed. 3 days later, I returned home. At first, everything seemed normal. The house smelled faintly like lemon cleaner. Vanessa had apparently tidied up while I was gone. Fresh flowers sat on the kitchen counter. But within minutes, little things started feeling wrong. I tried connecting to the Wi-Fi. Incorrect password. I frowned and checked the card taped near my desk where I always wrote passwords. It had been removed. Then I tried opening my laptop. Password incorrect. Again. Again. My chest tightened. I reached for my phone to reset the login through email verification, but my phone demanded a new 6-digit passcode, one I didn't recognize. My hands started shaking. I suddenly felt like a stranger inside my own life. Ethan arrived an hour later carrying grocery bags like nothing was wrong. "Perfect timing," he said cheerfully. "I brought soup." I stood in the kitchen clutching my locked phone. "What did you do?" His smile faded slightly. "What do you mean? My passwords? My accounts? My phone?" He set the groceries down slowly. "Oh, that. As casually as if he were discussing the weather. I updated everything while you were in the hospital," he explained. "Your accounts were outdated and vulnerable. You changed my passwords without asking me. I had to, Mom." "No, you didn't." His expression hardened just a little. "You fell alone in the kitchen. You could have hit your head and forgotten everything. Someone has to make responsible decisions here. Responsible decisions." I stared at my own son and suddenly realized he was speaking to me the way adults speak to difficult children. Not equals. Not family. Control disguised as patience. "I want my passwords back," I said quietly. "You don't need them right now." The room went completely still. I honestly think that was the exact moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like ice breaking beneath your feet. "I don't need them." "Mom?" Ethan sighed. "Why are you making this difficult? Making this difficult?" I looked down at my phone again, still useless in my hands. Then another thought struck me. My email. I walked to the desktop computer in Daniel's old office and tried recovering the account. The recovery number listed was Ethan's, not mine. My stomach dropped so suddenly I had to sit down. "You changed the recovery information." Ethan crossed his arms. "It's safer this way. Safer for who I wanted to ask it." But deep down, I think I already knew the answer. That evening after Ethan left, I sat alone in Daniel's office, staring at framed photographs lining the bookshelf. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, fishing trips, 1,000 little pieces of a family that once felt unbreakable. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think something I never believed I'd think about my own child. What if this wasn't concern? What if Ethan was slowly taking control of everything I tried sleeping that night, but every sound in the house startled me awake? Around midnight, I walked downstairs for water. That's when I noticed a printed sheet sticking halfway out of the trash can near the kitchen desk. I pulled it free. It was an email confirmation notice. "Account recovery settings updated. Authorized by Ethan Phillips." But that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. At the bottom of the email chain was a forwarded message from Vanessa. "Once everything is consolidated, the house situation will be much easier." I read that sentence 3 times. The house situation. Not Kelly. Not Mom. The house. Suddenly, the walls around me no longer felt like home. They felt like something people were quietly calculating the value of, and for the first time since Daniel died, I felt truly alone. The strangest part about losing control of your life is how quietly it happens. Nobody storms into your home and announces it. Nobody says, "Starting today, your opinions no longer matter." Instead, it happens through little humiliations that pile up slowly until one morning you wake up and realize you are being treated like a guest in your own existence. 3 days after I found the email in the trash, Ethan came by carrying 2 large plastic containers filled with medications. "I organized everything for you," he said proudly. I stared at the labels. Morning, afternoon, night, Monday through Sunday. You went through my medicine cabinet. "You were mixing pills up, Mom." "No, I wasn't." He sighed, the way tired parents sigh at stubborn children. "You forgot your blood pressure medication twice last month?" "I forgot once." "Still dangerous?" Every conversation suddenly ended the same way. Not with discussion, with correction. Vanessa became even worse. She started dropping by unannounced almost daily. At first she framed it as helping. I brought groceries. I folded some laundry. I scheduled a lawn service. But slowly, her presence began changing the atmosphere of the house itself. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets because my system was inefficient. She removed rugs because they were fall hazards. She replaced framed family photographs with minimalist decorations that looked like they belonged inside a hotel lobby. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and froze. Daniel's old recliner was gone. The chair where he drank coffee every morning for 15 years, the chair where he held my hand during chemo treatments, the chair where he fell asleep watching baseball. Gone. I found it later in the garage covered with a tarp. Vanessa smiled when I confronted her. It didn't fit the updated space. Updated space. I almost laughed hearing those words, because somehow my entire life had become a renovation project to her. I want it back inside. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically. Kelly clutter can increase anxiety for seniors. I cannot explain the rage that moved through me then. Not because of the chair alone, because suddenly I understood what she was doing. Every object connected to my authority, my memories, my independence, slowly disappearing. Like she was erasing evidence that I had ever truly owned this life. Ethan defended everything she did. Always calmly, always reasonably. That's what made it so difficult. Cruelty delivered softly makes you question your own instincts. One evening, Ethan sat across from me at the kitchen table while reviewing paperwork on his tablet. "I think you should stop driving for a while." I looked up immediately. "What?" "After the fall, it's safer." "I sprained my ankle, Ethan. I didn't lose my eyesight." He rubbed his forehead impatiently. "Mom, why do you fight every suggestion?" Suggestion. That word again. As if taking away my independence was some gentle recommendation. "I've driven for over 50 years without an accident." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" He hesitated, and for just 1 second something cold passed across his face. "Control." The word flashed through my mind so suddenly it startled me. Control was the point, not safety, not concern. Control. A week later, I discovered Ethan had already contacted my doctor without telling me. I only found out because the receptionist accidentally mentioned it during a follow-up appointment. "Oh yes, your son updated us about your memory concerns." I stared at her. "My what?" She looked uncomfortable immediately. "He mentioned occasional confusion after your fall." I felt heat rush into my face. "There are no memory concerns." The receptionist quickly apologized, but the damage was already done. On the drive home, my hands shook so badly, I had to pull into a grocery store parking lot. I sat there gripping the steering wheel and suddenly realized something terrifying. Ethan wasn't just helping manage my finances anymore. He was building a narrative, a careful one, an elderly widow, recent fall, confusion, forgetfulness, difficulty managing alone. I knew enough about the world to understand where those stories often lead. Guardianship, loss of legal authority, adult children taking complete control. I remembered articles Vanessa used to bring to dinner. I remembered how interested she always seemed in estate laws. And for the first time, genuine fear settled deep inside my chest. Not fear of aging, fear of my own son. That night, Susan Miller called. Susan had been my closest friend for 32 years. Widowed too, sharp as a razor despite being 70. "You sound tired," she said immediately. "I'm fine." "Kelly, I've known you since shoulder pads were fashionable. Don't lie to me." I almost cried hearing that, because sometimes all it takes is one person treating you normally to realize how abnormal everything else has become. so I told her some of it. Not all. I still wasn't ready to say the worst thoughts out loud. But enough. There was a long silence when I finished. Then Susan quietly asked, "Do you trust Vanessa? No. And Ethan?" That question hurt more than anything, because I didn't know anymore. 2 days later, things got worse. I came downstairs early in the morning and heard voices in the dining room. Ethan and Vanessa were speaking softly, thinking I was still asleep. I almost announced myself. But then I heard Vanessa say something that stopped me cold. "Once the house sells, this gets much easier. The house sells." My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. Ethan lowered his voice too much for me to hear everything clearly, but I caught fragments. Too emotional. "Best decision long term. Assisted living. Assisted living." I gripped the hallway wall to steady myself. Nobody had discussed selling my house with me. Nobody. Yet they were already planning it like the decision belonged to them. Suddenly, every changed password, every helpful conversation, every subtle insult snapped together into one horrifying picture. They weren't preparing to support me. They were preparing to replace me. I backed away quietly before they could notice me listening. Then I went upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom like a frightened child. I stared at my reflection for a very long time. My hair had more gray now. My face looked thinner since Daniel died. There were lines around my mouth grief had carved permanently into my skin, but my eyes were still clear. I was not confused. I was not helpless. And I was not incapable of understanding exactly what was happening. That realization changed something inside me. Until then, I had still hoped there was some misunderstanding, some overprotective mistake. But sitting there alone in the bathroom hearing my own son discuss selling my home behind my back, I finally understood the truth. Ethan and Vanessa no longer saw me as a person with authority over her own life. They saw me as an obstacle standing between them and what they wanted. And for the first time since Daniel died, another memory suddenly returned to me with absolute clarity. His voice. "If anything ever feels wrong financially after I'm gone." I closed my eyes. Then another memory surfaced. A different sentence this time. One I hadn't thought about in years. "Kelly, if you ever truly need help, look for the blue envelope." My eyes opened immediately. The blue envelope. I whispered the words aloud like they belonged to someone else, because suddenly, deep beneath the fear, something else appeared. Hope. For the next 2 days, I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's words. The blue envelope. Memory is a strange thing when grief is involved. Certain moments stay painfully sharp forever, while others disappear beneath years of sadness until one sentence suddenly pulls them back into the light. I remembered exactly where we had been when Daniel mentioned it. 3 summers before he died. We were sitting on the back porch during a thunderstorm drinking coffee long after midnight because neither of us could sleep. Daniel had been quieter than usual that evening. Not sad exactly. Heavy, like a man carrying thoughts he wasn't sure how to share. At one point, he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "If something ever feels wrong after I'm gone," he said carefully, "look for the blue envelope." I laughed softly back then. "What blue envelope?" "You'll know it when you see it." I rolled my eyes. That sounds unnecessarily mysterious. Daniel smiled faintly, but the sadness never fully left his face. "Promise me you'll remember. At the time I assumed he was talking about insurance papers or legal documents. I never imagined he might have been preparing for something much worse. Now standing alone in my bedroom decades later, I replayed that memory over and over until my chest hurt. Where would he hide something important? Daniel had always been methodical. Not paranoid. Prepared. There's a difference. After breakfast the next morning, Ethan texted me, "Running errands today. Vanessa may stop by later to help organize the upstairs closets." Organize. Everything with them had become organizing, managing, helping, updating. Words that sounded harmless until you realized they were slowly removing your control piece by piece. I looked around my bedroom carefully. If Vanessa planned to go through closets today, I needed to search before she arrived. I started in Daniel's old office first. Nothing. Then the filing cabinet. Old tax returns. Insurance statements. Expired warranties. I searched the attic, next climbing slowly because my ankle still hurt. Dust coated everything. Christmas decorations. Old suitcases. Boxes filled with Ethan's childhood drawings. For nearly 2 hours, I found nothing, and with every passing minute, I began feeling foolish. Maybe grief had twisted the memory. Maybe there never was an envelope at all. Maybe I was becoming exactly what Ethan claimed: confused, emotional, overwhelmed. That thought scared me more than anything. I sat down heavily on the basement stairs, suddenly exhausted. The basement smelled faintly of cedar and detergent. Daniel used to spend hours down there fixing things that never really needed fixing. Workbench, tool shelves, storage bins. Then my eyes drifted toward the old sewing cabinet near the washing machine. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were fabric scraps, knitting needles, old photo albums, and beneath them, a blue envelope. My breath caught instantly. Not bright blue. Muted, navy blue. My hands started trembling before I even touched it. The envelope had my name written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. Kelly. Just that. Nothing else. I sat down slowly on the concrete floor and stared at it for nearly a full minute before opening it. Inside was a small silver key taped to an index card, and beneath it, a folded letter. My dearest Kelly, if you are reading this, then something has already started feeling wrong. First, I need you to breathe. You are not powerless. The key belongs to Safety Deposit Box 214 at Green Ridge Federal Credit Union in Burlington, Vermont. Martha Green will help you. Everything you need is there. I pray you never have to open it. But if Ethan ever mistakes love for entitlement, this will protect you. I had to stop reading because tears blurred the page completely. Daniel knew. Somehow, years before any of this happened, my husband knew. I pressed the letter against my chest and cried harder than I had since his funeral. Not only because I missed him, because suddenly I understood something devastating. Daniel hadn't just prepared for his death. He had prepared for the possibility that our own son might someday betray me. That realization shattered something inside me all over again. I wiped my eyes and continued reading. Trust your instincts, Kelly. You are stronger than people think, especially Ethan. There are things you do not know yet. I hoped you never would. But if the time comes, Rebecca Hayes already understands everything. And finally, do not let guilt make you surrender your freedom. Love, Daniel. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. Rebecca Hayes. I recognized the name immediately. Daniel's estate attorney. Why would Daniel involve an attorney secretly? What things didn't I know yet? I stared at the small silver key again. Vermont. Daniel and I had visited Burlington only once together nearly 15 years earlier. We spent a weekend there during autumn after Ethan graduated college. At the time, Daniel insisted on stopping at a tiny credit union for nearly an hour while I wandered a bookstore nearby. When I asked why, he simply said, "Taking care of paperwork." I never questioned it. Now I understood that trip differently. Suddenly, footsteps sounded upstairs. I jumped so violently I nearly dropped the letter. Kelly Vanessa's voice echoed faintly through the house. "Are you downstairs?" Panic rushed through me instantly. Without thinking, I slid the envelope beneath my sweater and quickly shoved the sewing supplies back into place. "Yes," I called out, forcing steadiness into my voice. Vanessa appeared at the basement stairs, smiling brightly. "There you are. I knocked twice." My heart pounded so hard I was certain she could hear it. I was looking through old things. Vanessa glanced around the basement. So much clutter down here. There it was again. Clutter. As though memories were inconveniences, her eyes drifted briefly toward the sewing cabinet. For one horrifying second, I thought she somehow knew. Then she smiled casually. "Ethan and I were thinking maybe we should help clean this area out next weekend." My stomach tightened. Help clean out. In other words, search. Erase. Control. I forced a small smile. "That's thoughtful." Vanessa studied my face carefully. "You feeling all right today? I'm fine. You seem emotional lately." The way she said emotional sounded dangerous. Like evidence. I suddenly realized something chilling. Everything I did now could potentially become part of the story they were building about me. Confused. Unstable. Unable to manage alone. I needed to be careful. Very careful. That night after Vanessa finally left, I locked myself in my bedroom and reread Daniel's letter 3 more times. Then I looked up Green Ridge Federal Credit Union online using my old laptop. Burlington, Vermont. Still there. Still operating. I stared at the screen for a long time before another realization struck me. Ethan monitored most of my accounts now. Most. But not all. There was still one small checking account tied to an old emergency savings fund Daniel and I had rarely touched. Ethan probably overlooked it because it contained less than $2,000. Enough for gas. Enough for a hotel if necessary. Enough to get to Vermont. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unfamiliar return to me. Not safety, not comfort, determination. Because somewhere inside a safety deposit box hundreds of miles away, my husband had left the truth. And whatever Ethan and Vanessa were hiding, Daniel already knew about it years ago. I waited 4 days before telling Susan about Vermont. Not because I didn't trust her, because saying it out loud would make everything real. Until then, part of me still wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation for all of this. Some misunderstanding, some terrible overreaction caused by grief and fear, but Daniel's letter destroyed that illusion completely. He had prepared for this, not for my loneliness, not for widowhood, for betrayal. Susan came over early Thursday morning carrying coffee and blueberry muffins from the bakery we used to visit after church years ago. The second she saw my face, she set the box down carefully. "What happened?" I handed her Daniel's letter without speaking. She read it slowly. Then again, when she finally looked up, her expression had changed completely. "This isn't paranoia, Kelly. No. You think Ethan knows about this account I don't know." Susan folded the letter carefully. "But Daniel did. That was the part neither of us could stop thinking about. Daniel had always been practical, logical, careful with words. If he secretly opened a safety deposit box in another state and left behind instructions involving a lawyer, then whatever he feared wasn't small. "We should go," Susan said quietly. The words should settled heavily between us. "Go," as if we were preparing for battle instead of visiting a bank. "I don't even know what we'll find. Neither did Daniel when he decided to protect you." That sentence stayed with me. Protect you. Not protect the money. Protect you. The next problem was Ethan. He had become increasingly involved in my daily schedule, calling constantly, dropping by unexpectedly, monitoring everything with exhausting politeness. I knew if I suddenly announced a road trip to Vermont, he would never allow it. That realization alone made me furious. Allow it. When had my own child started believing he had authority over me? Friday morning, Ethan stopped by before work carrying grocery bags again. "I noticed a pharmacy charge yesterday," he said casually while unloading soup cans into the pantry. What was that for? I froze. He was monitoring my spending now. It was toothpaste Ethan. Oh. But his eyes lingered on me a second too long. Evaluating, tracking, watching. I suddenly realized something else terrifying. People think control always looks aggressive. Sometimes it looks attentive. That afternoon, Susan helped me create a plan. We decided to leave Sunday morning before dawn. I would tell Ethan I was spending the day resting because my ankle still hurt. Part of me hated lying, but another part understood something important now. When people start using your honesty against you, secrecy becomes survival. Saturday night, I barely slept. I kept imagining every possible outcome. What if the box was empty? What if Daniel had exaggerated everything? What if Ethan discovered we left? And beneath all of that fear was another question I still could not answer. What exactly had my husband learned about our son? At 5:30 Sunday morning, Susan pulled quietly into my driveway. The world outside still looked blue-black with early dawn. I packed lightly. Daniel's letter, my purse, a small overnight bag, and the silver key. As I locked the front door behind me, I suddenly felt guilty. Not because I was leaving, because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't asking permission. The drive to Vermont took nearly 10 hours. Susan tried distracting me with old stories and music from the 70s, but my mind kept drifting back to Ethan. I remembered his little league games, his graduation, the way he cried at Daniel's funeral. How could all of that exist beside this newer version of him? At one point, Susan glanced over and quietly asked, "What if he really believes he's helping?" I stared out the passenger window for a long moment before answering. "Then why does it feel like I'm disappearing?" Neither of us spoke much after that. By the time we reached Burlington evening, rain had started falling softly across the city. Greenridge Federal Credit Union sat on a quiet corner street between a bookstore and an insurance office. It looked impossibly ordinary. Small brick building, American flag outside. Nothing dramatic, nothing mysterious. And yet my entire future suddenly felt connected to that building. "We can still leave," Susan whispered gently, but I shook my head immediately. No more pretending. Inside, the credit union smelled faintly like old paper and coffee. A silver-haired woman behind the front desk looked up as we entered. "Can I help you?" My voice nearly failed me. I believe my husband rented a safety deposit box here years ago." The woman smiled politely. "Name Daniel Phillips." Everything changed in her face instantly. Not shock. Recognition. "Oh," she said softly. "Mrs. Phillips." My stomach tightened. "You know who I am. I'm Martha Green." She stood slowly. Your husband asked me to help you personally if you ever came here. Susan and I exchanged stunned looks. Martha lowered her voice. Would you like some privacy? A few minutes later, she led us into a small office near the back of the building. You knew Daniel? I asked carefully. For years. Something in her expression told me she knew far more than she was saying. Martha folded her hands together gently. Your husband was a very careful man. The way she emphasized careful made my pulse quicken. He told me if you ever arrived alone asking for box 214, it meant something had gone wrong. Gone wrong. Even hearing the words aloud made me feel cold. Martha unlocked a drawer and removed paperwork. I'll need your identification and signature. My hands trembled signing the forms. Finally, she led us into the vault room. Rows and rows of metal boxes lined the walls. Cold. Quiet. Permanent. Martha stopped at box 214. Then she handed me the second key. For one strange second, I couldn't move, because suddenly this moment felt larger than documents or money. It felt like opening the truth about my entire family. Susan squeezed my shoulder softly. You can do this. I inserted the key. The lock clicked. Martha carefully removed the box and placed it on a private table before leaving us alone. The metal container was heavier than I expected. Inside were several thick folders, a USB drive, sealed envelopes, and legal documents stacked neatly in perfect order. And sitting on top of everything, another letter from Daniel. But this time, one sentence was written across the front in large handwriting. Kelly, if you are reading this, Ethan has already crossed a line. I prayed he never would. My entire body went cold. Susan whispered, Oh my God. With shaking fingers, I opened the letter. Inside, Daniel had listed dates, bank transactions, copies of signatures, private notes. And one sentence near the top made the room tilt around me. 10 years ago, I caught Ethan forging my signature to cover investment losses. I stopped breathing. No, that couldn't be real. Not Ethan. Not my son. But there it was in Daniel's handwriting. Detailed. Careful. Undeniable. And suddenly, I understood. This safety deposit box was never created to hide money. It was created to hide the truth. I read Daniel's letter 3 times before I could fully understand it. Not because the words were unclear, because my mind refused to accept them. Ethan forged his father's signature. Even now, saying the sentence feels unreal. Susan sat beside me in complete silence while rain tapped softly against the credit union windows outside the vault room. The metal box remained open between us like something dangerous. Inside were folders labeled carefully in Daniel's handwriting. Bank records. Trust documents. Ethan. The last one made my stomach turn. I finally unfolded the rest of Daniel's letter with trembling hands. Kelly, before you continue reading, I need you to understand something. I never stopped loving our son. Not once. Everything I did was to protect this family, including him, but love becomes dangerous when it protects someone from consequences for too long. I closed my eyes immediately, because deep down I already knew what kind of man Daniel had been. The kind who cleaned up disasters quietly to preserve peace. The kind who carried burdens alone. The kind who believed keeping a family together mattered more than exposing painful truths. I kept reading. 10 years ago, Ethan became involved in a private investment partnership through a colleague from work. He lost a significant amount of money. More importantly, he attempted to recover those losses using funds from the company account. The room suddenly felt too small. No, not Ethan. Daniel continued. When I confronted him, he panicked. He forged my signature on authorization forms, hoping to delay discovery long enough to replace the money. My hands started shaking violently. Susan whispered softly, "Kelly?" But I barely heard her. All I could see was Ethan as a little boy sitting at our kitchen table coloring birthday cards for me. The disconnect between that child and this reality felt unbearable. Daniel's letter continued for several pages. Every sentence broke my heart a little more. He explained how he discovered irregular financial activity while reviewing quarterly company records. At first, he assumed it was bookkeeping errors. Then he found the forged signatures. He confronted Ethan privately. According to Daniel, Ethan completely collapsed, crying, begging, promising it was temporary, promising he would fix everything, promising Vanessa didn't know. That part caught my attention immediately, but a few paragraphs later, Daniel corrected himself. Eventually, I realized Vanessa knew far more than Ethan admitted. I looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" Susan shook her head slowly. "Keep reading." Daniel described noticing changes in Vanessa years earlier. Questions about ownership, questions about wills, questions about transfer structures and property protections. At first, he believed she was simply financially ambitious, but over time he noticed something darker. She viewed relationships as leverage. One sentence in particular made my blood run cold. Vanessa once asked me privately what would happen to the house if you became mentally incompetent before death. I stared at the paper in horror. Mentally incompetent. The exact narrative they were building now. Daniel wrote, "That conversation frightened me more than I admitted at the time. I suddenly remembered every article Vanessa brought to dinner about elderly confusion, every mention of memory decline, every carefully planted comment. This had not started recently. It had been growing for years. My chest hurt so badly I had to stop reading again." Susan rubbed my back gently. "You okay?" "No," I whispered honestly, "because grief is one thing, but realizing your husband spent years secretly protecting you from your own child, that pain is different. It changes the meaning of your entire marriage." I continued. "I made a decision after Ethan's forgery. I paid the losses quietly to avoid criminal consequences and public disgrace, but I also realized something difficult. Ethan feared losing status more than losing integrity, and fear combined with entitlement becomes dangerous." Tears slipped down my face again. Daniel had known, not suspected, known. And somehow he carried that knowledge without destroying our family publicly. There was no bitterness in his writing. That hurt the most. Only sadness. He described trying repeatedly to guide Ethan back toward honesty, helping him financially, advising him privately, warning him about debt and image-driven living. But every time Ethan escaped consequences, the behavior worsened. Then came another sentence I will never forget for the rest of my life. "Kelly, our son, is not evil, but he is weak around people who measure worth through money." Immediately, I thought of Vanessa. Not because Ethan was innocent, but because suddenly I understood their dynamic differently. Vanessa amplified the worst parts of him. She fed every insecurity, every hunger for status, every fear of appearing unsuccessful. Daniel wrote that he eventually created an irrevocable trust, protecting most of the family assets. Not because he wanted to punish Ethan, because he feared Ethan might someday pressure me emotionally after Daniel died. The trust places all control exclusively with you while you remain mentally competent. No transfer can occur without independent medical evaluation and attorney review. Rebecca Hayes knows every detail. A strange sound escaped my throat then, half sob, half relief. Ethan and Vanessa thought they controlled everything, but they didn't. Daniel had quietly protected the real assets years ago. The house, investment accounts, retirement reserves, most of it sat inside protections Ethan couldn't touch. That realization changed the entire situation instantly. For the first time in weeks, I no longer felt trapped. I felt angry. Not explosive anger, cold anger. The kind that comes when fear finally burns away. There was also a sealed envelope inside the box marked, "For Kelly, only listen privately." My hands trembled opening it. Inside was a flash drive. Martha later helped us access it from a small office computer upstairs. The recording began with static. Then Daniel's voice filled the speakers. Older, tired, but unmistakably him. "Kelly, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry." I covered my mouth instantly. Hearing the voice of someone you loved after they're gone feels almost supernatural. "I hoped you would never need any of this," Daniel continued. "But if Ethan has started trying to control your finances or isolate you, then you need to stop doubting yourself immediately." Every word hit like lightning. He knew. He knew exactly how this would happen. "You are not confused," he said firmly. "You are not incapable. And if anyone is making you feel small in your own home, they are doing it intentionally." I started crying openly then, because for weeks Ethan and Vanessa had made me question my own judgment, my own memory, my own reality. And suddenly, Daniel's voice cut through all of it. Clear, steady, protective. "I made mistakes with Ethan," he admitted quietly in the recording. "I covered consequences instead of forcing accountability. That's my failure, not yours." Then came the sentence that changed everything inside me. "Do not surrender your independence out of guilt simply because he is your son." Silence filled the room after the recording ended. Nobody moved. Finally, Susan whispered, "Kelly, this is serious." I nodded slowly. Yes, not just family conflict, not overprotectiveness, systematic control, financial manipulation, psychological pressure. And now I understood why Daniel hid everything. Because he knew one terrible truth about love. Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones society expects you to trust automatically. I wiped my eyes carefully and looked back into the metal box. Beneath the folders sat one final document, a detailed trust summary listing protected assets. The amount at the bottom made Susan gasp softly. I just stared. All this time, Ethan believed he was consolidating control over my finances. But the accounts he accessed were only fragments. The real estate, the protected investments, the majority of Daniel's legacy, none of it belonged within Ethan's reach. And suddenly, for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something important. My son thought he was winning. But he had absolutely no idea what his father had hidden from him. The drive home from Vermont felt completely different from the drive there. Before I had traveled like a frightened widow searching for answers. Now I was returning with proof. Proof that Daniel had seen this coming. Proof that Ethan and Vanessa were lying. Proof that I was not helpless. And strangely, that knowledge made me calmer instead of angrier, because once the truth becomes clear, fear loses some of its power. Susan kept glancing at me while she drove. "You're very quiet," I'm thinking. That worries me more than yelling. For the first time in weeks, I laughed softly. A real laugh. Small, but real. When we finally reached Ohio late Sunday evening, I noticed Ethan's SUV parked outside my house immediately. My stomach tightened. "He's here," Susan whispered. The porch light was on. Two silhouettes moved behind the living room curtains, waiting. I suddenly understood something important. Ethan wasn't simply checking on me anymore. He was monitoring me. Susan turned off the engine slowly. "You want me to come inside?" Part of me desperately wanted to say yes, but another part understood the situation had changed now. Daniel's words echoed inside my mind. "Do not surrender your independence out of guilt." "No," I said quietly. "Not yet." Susan touched my hand. "Call me if anything feels wrong." Everything already felt wrong, but I nodded anyway. The second I stepped through the front door, Ethan stood up from the couch. "Where were you?" "Not hello." "Not are you okay?" "Where were you?" Vanessa rose beside him, holding a mug of tea like she owned the house. "I got worried," Ethan continued. "You didn't answer your phone all day." "My phone you locked me out of?" I asked calmly. His face tightened instantly. Vanessa stepped in quickly with that practiced, gentle voice of hers. "Kelly, we were scared something happened." I studied both of them carefully. For the first time, I wasn't looking at them emotionally. I was observing them, calculating, the same way they had been calculating me. And suddenly I noticed details I'd ignored before. The impatience behind Ethan's concern. The way Vanessa scanned my expression constantly like she was measuring risk. The way they exchanged tiny glances whenever I spoke. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about losing control. I visited Susan. I lied smoothly. Vanessa's eyes narrowed almost invisibly. All day we drove around. Ethan crossed his arms. "You should have told me." There it was again. The assumption that I owed him permission. I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm still allowed to leave my house, Ethan." A flash of irritation crossed his face before disappearing. "Of course." But he didn't sound convincing anymore. That night I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, because I was planning. Daniel had left me evidence, but evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed protection. Real protection. Monday morning, while Ethan was at work and Vanessa was supposedly meeting a realtor friend, I called Rebecca Hayes, Daniel's attorney. Her assistant transferred me immediately the moment I mentioned Daniel's name. Kelly Rebecca's voice softened instantly. "Are you all right?" The question nearly broke me, because unlike Ethan and Vanessa, Rebecca sounded genuinely concerned. "No," I admitted quietly. "I think Daniel prepared something because he was worried about Ethan." There was a long silence. Then Rebecca spoke carefully. "Can you come into my office today?" "I think so." "Good. And Kelly. Yes, do not sign anything anyone puts in front of you until we talk." My chest tightened. She knew. Not details, maybe, but enough. Rebecca's office sat downtown in an old brick building Daniel always liked because it reminded him of real law offices from movies. The moment I entered, Rebecca came around her desk and hugged me tightly. She was in her early 60s, with sharp silver blonde hair and the kind of eyes that noticed everything. "I'm sorry it's come to this," she whispered. Those words chilled me instantly. "You knew." Rebecca exhaled slowly before motioning for me to sit. Daniel was worried for years. I placed the folders from Vermont carefully onto her desk. Rebecca's expression changed immediately when she saw them. "He gave you everything. Everything." She nodded grimly. "This is the backup documentation." "Backup." The words sounded terrifying. Rebecca spent nearly 2 hours reviewing the files while I sat across from her, trying not to unravel emotionally. Finally, she removed her glasses slowly. Kelly, what Ethan and Vanessa are doing could qualify as elder financial abuse. Hearing the words aloud made my stomach twist. Not family conflict, not misunderstanding, abuse. Rebecca explained everything carefully, changing passwords, monitoring communications, restricting access to accounts, pressuring property transfers, building narratives about mental instability, all common warning signs. Daniel anticipated this exact pattern, she said quietly. I stared at the desk. How could a mother not see this happening? Rebecca's expression softened. Because love makes people hopeful. Tears burned behind my eyes again. I keep remembering Ethan as a little boy. I know. That's what hurts most. Rebecca leaned forward gently. Kelly loving who he was does not require surrendering to who he became. That sentence stayed with me. For the next hour, Rebecca helped me create a strategy. Not emotional revenge. Protection. Legal protection. Practical protection. First, we secured copies of every trust document. Second, Rebecca instructed me to begin documenting everything. Every conversation, every pressure tactic, every financial change, every comment about confusion or assisted living. People like this rely on isolation, Rebecca explained. Documentation breaks that power. Then she asked a question that made my pulse quicken. Do Ethan and Vanessa know you visited Vermont Number Good? Why, Rebecca looked directly at me. Because the moment they realize you still have control over the real assets, they'll panic. Panic. Not guilt. Not shame. Panic. That alone told me everything. Over the next week, I began quietly collecting evidence. I photographed emails, recorded dates, saved text messages. I even wrote down exact conversations after Ethan left the house. And meanwhile, I pretended. That became the hardest part. Pretending to be weaker than I was. Pretending confusion. Pretending exhaustion. Pretending dependence. One evening, Ethan sat beside me at dinner. You seem calmer lately. I forced a tired smile. I'm trying not to fight you anymore. Relief flooded his face so quickly it almost made me sick. That's good, Mom. Vanessa squeezed his arm beneath the table. Neither of them realized I noticed. But I noticed everything now. 3 days later, Vanessa arrived carrying brochures. Senior living communities. My chest burned with rage seeing them spread across my kitchen table like vacation catalogs. This one has wonderful memory care programs, Vanessa said brightly. Memory care. She kept planting the same narrative repeatedly. I lowered my eyes carefully. It all feels overwhelming. Vanessa exchanged another glance with Ethan. Exactly what they wanted. Later that night, I overheard them whispering in the hallway outside my bedroom. She's finally accepting it, Vanessa murmured. Ethan sounded relieved. Good. Once we get the house listed, things will move faster. Listed. Not discussed. Not considered. Already decided. I stood silently in the dark behind my bedroom door, listening to my own son plan the sale of my home. And for the first time, I didn't cry, because now I knew something they didn't. Daniel had already protected everything that truly mattered, and Ethan still had no idea the real battle hadn't even started yet. The family meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Vanessa called it that in a text message filled with fake warmth. Just a small family discussion about next steps for your comfort and care. I stared at the message for a long time after reading it. Comfort and care. People can hide terrible intentions behind beautiful words. Rebecca instructed me not to refuse the meeting. "Let them proceed," she said calmly during our phone call the night before. "The more confident they become, the more careless they'll be." My stomach twisted nervously. What if I can't stay calm? You can. I'm not as strong as Daniel was. Rebecca's voice softened. Kelly surviving this already proves you are. That night I barely slept. Not because I feared losing anymore, because I feared what was coming emotionally. No matter what Ethan had done, he was still my son. And there is no pain quite like preparing yourself to confront someone you once held as a baby. Thursday morning arrived gray and rainy. Vanessa showed up early carrying pastries and expensive coffee like she was hosting a brunch instead of an ambush. "You should wear something comfortable today," she said sweetly while hanging her coat. I almost asked why. Then I remembered. They thought they had already won. Ethan arrived an hour later carrying a leather folder beneath his arm, the same kind financial advisors use during client meetings. Only this time the client was his own mother. "Morning, Mom." He kissed my forehead casually. The gesture nearly broke my heart, because for one brief second he looked like my boy again. Then Vanessa started arranging paperwork across my dining room table, and the illusion disappeared. A woman I didn't recognize arrived shortly after noon. Short gray hair, professional smile, leather briefcase. Vanessa introduced her quickly. "This is Diane. She's just here to notarize a few documents." Just. Always just. I sat slowly at the table pretending nervousness. In truth, my pulse genuinely hammered against my ribs. Not because I doubted Rebecca's plan, because emotional betrayal still hurts even when you understand it clearly. Ethan opened the folder. "We've been discussing safer long-term options for you." Options. Another lie. Because nobody had asked what I wanted, Vanessa slid several pages toward me. "This would allow us to streamline things while you transition." Transition. The words sounded so polished, so reasonable, but underneath them sat the truth control. I looked down carefully at the paperwork. Property authorization. Financial consolidation forms. Limited transfer permissions. And one line near the bottom made my chest tighten. Authorization to list residential property for sale. My house. Daniel's house, the home where we raised Ethan, already prepared for listing, without my consent. I lowered my eyes quickly so they wouldn't see the fury burning there. Ethan leaned forward gently. "We know this is emotional, Mom." Emotional. There it was again. Every feeling I had reduced to instability, every objection treated like confusion. Vanessa reached across the table and touched my hand. "You shouldn't have to manage all this stress alone." I almost pulled away, but instead I let my shoulders slump slightly. Pretending weakness now felt disgusting. Still necessary. "I'm tired," I whispered. Instant relief flickered across Ethan's face, like a businessman finally closing a difficult negotiation. That expression destroyed something inside me permanently, because no loving son should ever look relieved watching his mother surrender her independence. Diane the notary adjusted her glasses politely. "Mrs. Phillips, I just need to confirm you understand the nature of these documents." Before I could answer, Vanessa spoke too quickly. "Kelly's been overwhelmed since her fall, but Ethan handles everything already." I noticed Diane glance at Vanessa carefully. Good. Rebecca had warned me real professionals often notice more than manipulators realize. I picked up the pen slowly. My hand genuinely trembled now. Not from fear of signing. From grief. Grief for the son I thought I raised. Ethan softened his voice. This is what Dad would have wanted. That sentence almost made me explode. Daniel would have hated this. Daniel created an entire secret trust specifically to stop this. But I forced myself to remain still. Vanessa smiled encouragingly. Once the house sells, assisted living will actually be so much easier. Assisted living. There it was again. Not if. When. Everything already decided. My entire future arranged like paperwork. I lowered the pen toward the signature line. And right before the tip touched paper, the front door opened. Footsteps crossed the hardwood floor. Then a calm, familiar voice spoke behind us. I would strongly advise nobody signs anything yet. Every head turned instantly. Rebecca Hayes walked into the dining room carrying a leather case beneath one arm, and beside her stood Susan. Behind them came another woman wearing a county identification badge. Officer Janet Cole. Adult Protective Services Investigations. For one beautiful second, absolute silence filled the room. Then chaos erupted. What is this? Vanessa snapped immediately. Ethan stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. Rebecca. Why are you here? Rebecca calmly set her briefcase onto the table. Because Kelly requested legal counsel. Vanessa's face drained slightly. That's ridiculous. No. Rebecca replied evenly. What's ridiculous is presenting property transfer documents to an elderly widow while controlling her financial access. Diane the notary immediately straightened in her seat. I'm sorry. Controlling access? I saw panic flicker across Ethan's face for the very first time. Not irritation, not frustration, panic. Officer Janet Cole stepped forward calmly. Mrs. Phillips, we've received concerns regarding potential financial coercion and isolation. Vanessa let out a sharp laugh. Oh my God. Kelly, are you serious right now? I finally looked directly at her. Really looked at her. No, I said quietly. You are. Ethan's face flushed red. Mom, this is insane. Rebecca opened her briefcase. Actually, Ethan, we have extensive documentation. She began laying papers across the dining room table one by one. Printed emails, password change confirmations, medical communication records, property listing drafts, notes regarding cognitive concerns. Every carefully hidden action suddenly exposed under bright afternoon light. Diane slowly pushed the documents away from herself. I'm not comfortable notarizing anything connected to this situation. Vanessa's composure cracked instantly. This is absurd. We've done nothing except help her. Officer Cole spoke calmly. Then you won't mind answering a few questions. Ethan looked directly at me then. Not at Rebecca. Not at Officer Cole. At me. And what I saw in his eyes nearly destroyed me. Betrayal. As though I had wronged him. How could you do this to me? He whispered. The words stunned me speechless. To him. Not what have I done. Not Mom, are you hurt. Only, how could you do this to me? That was the moment I finally understood something painful. Ethan truly believed he deserved control, not wanted it. Deserved it. Rebecca slid one final folder onto the table. Trust documentation. Ethan frowned immediately. "What is that?" Rebecca met his eyes calmly. "The accounts your father protected." I watched confusion spread across Ethan's face, then concern, then dawning horror. What accounts? And suddenly, I realized the truth. Despite all his planning, despite all the passwords, despite all the manipulation, Ethan still had absolutely no idea where the real family assets actually were. The moment Rebecca said the accounts your father protected, the entire room changed temperature. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting yet. No sudden movement. Just a shift in silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had tightened around Ethan and Vanessa. Ethan blinked at her slowly. "What accounts are you talking about?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened the folder Daniel had left behind in Vermont and placed it carefully on the dining table right between the notary's abandoned documents and Vanessa's half-finished assisted living transition papers. Susan stood behind me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I could feel her tension but also her support. Officer Cole took one step forward, observing everything without interruption. Rebecca finally spoke. "Let's be very clear," she said. "Your father did not leave Mrs. Phillips financially exposed." Vanessa let out a short, nervous laugh. "That's impossible. Ethan has been managing her accounts for months." Rebecca turned her gaze toward her. "Which accounts?" Vanessa hesitated for half a second too long. I mean all of them." Rebecca nodded once like she had expected that answer. "No," she said calmly. "Not all of them." Then she tapped the folder. "This is an irrevocable trust established over 10 years ago by Daniel Phillips. It contains the majority of the marital estate investment portfolios and long-term assets. It is not accessible through normal banking credentials." The words landed slowly. "Irrevocable trust." Ethan frowned. "I've never heard of that." Rebecca looked directly at him. "That's the point." For the first time, I saw something break behind Ethan's eyes. Not guilt. Not regret. Confusion. And underneath that, fear. Vanessa stepped forward quickly, trying to regain control of the room. "Ethan, this is just legal language. She's trying to scare us." Rebecca didn't react. Instead, she placed another document on the table, a certified copy of Daniel's trust declaration. Ethan leaned forward and scanned it quickly. I saw the exact moment his breathing changed. This can't be right." Rebecca spoke quietly. "It is." Vanessa grabbed the paper from his hand. What is it saying? Ethan didn't answer immediately, because for the first time he understood something he hadn't considered before. He wasn't in control of everything. He had only been controlling what was visible. I watched his face carefully as he read, and I saw it. The realization, slow, uncomfortable, then crushing. "This account," he whispered. "It's under Mom's sole beneficiary control." Rebecca nodded. "Correct." Vanessa froze. "That's not possible." Officer Cole stepped slightly closer. "It is possible if established properly before incapacity concerns arise." Vanessa turned sharply toward me. "You planned this." Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was panicked, desperate, like someone watching a door close that they thought would stay open forever. I shook my head slowly. My husband did. That sentence carried more weight than anything I had said all day. Ethan looked at me now. Really looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen since this began. Uncertainty. "You knew about this, I didn't," I said honestly. "Not until last week." Rebecca added gently, "Neither did he." "That was intentional." Ethan swallowed hard. So everything I've been managing, the passwords, the accounts. He stopped, because the implication became clear even to him. He had been controlling surface-level finances, checking accounts, logins, access points, but not ownership, not structure, not the actual estate. Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. Then where is it? Rebecca answered immediately. Protected. Protected by who? Rebecca glanced at me briefly. By your father. Silence. A deep, unbearable silence. Ethan stepped back slowly as if the room itself had tilted. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Why would Dad do this? Rebecca's expression softened slightly because he discovered something 10 years ago that changed how he viewed financial trust. Vanessa shook her head quickly. This is manipulation. She's turning us into villains. Officer Cole finally spoke. Mrs. Phillips, she said calmly, we've reviewed communications. There are concerns about restricted access to personal devices, financial isolation, and pressure regarding property transfer. Vanessa turned toward her instantly. That's not what happened. But her voice wasn't as confident anymore. Ethan suddenly looked at me again. His tone changed. Lower, strained. Mom, did you tell them to do this? That question hurt more than anything else, because it revealed everything. Even now, even after everything, he still believed I was the source of the problem. Not the victim, not the one being controlled, but the one causing consequences. No, I said quietly. I didn't. Rebecca stepped in again. Ethan, your father documented everything. The password changes, the communication shifts, the attempts to establish guardianship narratives. Guardianship, I interrupted. The word made my stomach drop. Rebecca nodded. Yes, there were indicators suggesting preparation for legal capacity questioning. Vanessa's face went pale. That's insane. But her voice trembled slightly now, because she knew. Ethan looked like he was struggling to process multiple realities at once. I was just trying to help her, he said again. But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. Susan finally spoke for the first time. Helping doesn't require removing someone's identity. Everyone turned toward her. Her voice was calm but firm. You don't take away someone's passwords, their phone, their decisions, and call it love. The room fell silent again. Officer Cole opened her notebook. I think we need to separate intention from behavior, she said professionally. Mr. Phillips, Mrs. Phillips, we are going to conduct an official review. Vanessa immediately stepped back. Review of what? Potential elder financial abuse indicators. The phrase hung in the air like a final verdict waiting to land. Ethan suddenly turned to Rebecca. Where is the money then? Rebecca met his eyes steadily. You don't need to worry about it. That answer hit him harder than anything else, because for the first time he realized he had no leverage left. No access, no control, no hidden advantage. Everything he believed he was managing had been irrelevant to ownership. And then something unexpected happened. Ethan's anger collapsed. Not explosively, not dramatically, just quietly, like a structure losing internal support. I don't understand, he said softly. Why would Dad do this to me? And I finally spoke again. My voice was tired, but steady. Maybe he didn't do it to you, I said. Maybe he did it to protect me. Ethan flinched. That landed differently. Vanessa grabbed her bag suddenly. This is ridiculous! Ethan, we're leaving. But Ethan didn't move. For the first time, he stayed still, because something had shifted inside him, too. Officer Cole stepped forward. "We will be in contact," she said calmly. "This situation will require documentation review." Vanessa walked toward the door, quickly, anger replacing panic now, but Ethan hesitated. At the doorway, he turned back and looked at me one last time. Not as a controller, not as a manager of my life, but as a son who suddenly didn't understand where he stood in it anymore. "Mom," he said quietly. I waited, but he didn't finish. Then he left. The front door closed softly behind him, and for the first time in months, the house was quiet in a different way. Not tense, not controlled, just still. Rebecca slowly closed the folder. "He anticipated more than you realize," she said gently. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking, but not from fear anymore. From release. "What happens now?" I asked. Rebecca answered carefully. "Now, you get your life back." And for the first time since Daniel died, I believed her. The house felt different after Ethan left. Not empty, not peaceful exactly, but finally honest. Like something had stopped pretending. For the first time in months, I could hear the small sounds I had stopped noticing, the refrigerator humming, the old wooden floor settling, the soft ticking of the clock Daniel had refused to replace because, as he used to say, time should sound like it exists. Rebecca stayed with me for a while after everyone left. Susan made tea in the kitchen without asking, moving around like she belonged there, which she always had. Officer Cole had taken notes, asked careful questions, and left me with her card and a quiet promise that the case would be formally reviewed. And just like that, the storm that had taken over my life didn't feel like chaos anymore. It felt like paperwork catching up to truth. When the door finally closed behind the last of them, I stood in the middle of my dining room and looked at the table. It was still covered with scattered documents, half-finished signatures, abandoned notary pages. Ethan's leather folder still lay open as if he had left in a hurry and never expected not to come back and finish the story he was writing for me. Vanessa's brochures for senior living were still stacked neatly in a corner. Everything they had tried to build around my life, frozen mid-construction. Susan broke the silence softly. "Do you want me to stay tonight?" I hesitated. For months I would have said yes immediately, but something inside me had changed. Not hardened, just returned. "No," I said gently. "I think I need to sit with this alone for a while." Susan studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "You're stronger than you think, Kelly." I almost laughed. Because I didn't feel strong. I felt exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. But I also didn't feel afraid anymore. That was new. After she left, I walked slowly through the house, room by room, like I was meeting it again for the first time. The living room still held the faint outline of where Daniel's chair used to be. I stood there for a long time, remembering how he used to sit in that exact spot reading newspapers he never finished. He always said he was reading the important parts first. Now I understood he had been doing that with life too, skipping nothing important, missing nothing dangerous. I sat down on the floor instead of the couch. For a long time, I just breathed. And then I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in weeks. I spoke out loud. "Daniel, you were right." My voice cracked immediately, because admitting that meant admitting everything else too. That he had seen it, that he had prepared for it, that somewhere in his quiet way of loving me, He had built a system to protect me from the people closest to us, even from our own son. The thought should have broken me completely, but instead, something surprising happened. I didn't break. I understood. The next morning, Rebecca called early. "The initial review has started," she said. "Elder Protective Services will be monitoring communications. You are not required to engage with Ethan or Vanessa without legal presence." I listened quietly. For the first time, I didn't feel overwhelmed by the process. I felt anchored. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked before I could stop myself. There was a pause. Rebecca's voice softened. "That depends on what he chooses to do next." That answer stayed with me long after the call ended, because it wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about choice. A week passed, then another. Ethan didn't come back immediately. Vanessa didn't either. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means distance before impact. During that time, I began to rebuild something I hadn't realized I lost: my own voice. I started managing small things again, my own appointments, my own grocery orders. Simple tasks that felt strangely powerful after months of being told I couldn't handle them. Rebecca checked in regularly, always careful, never pushing. Susan visited often, bringing food stories and normalcy. And slowly, the house stopped feeling like a place I was trapped in. It started feeling like mine again. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after everything collapsed, I heard a knock at the door. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Ethan stood there alone. No Vanessa, no folder, no confident expression of control, just a man who looked tired in a way I had never seen before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Can I come in?" I hesitated, not because I was afraid, because I was no longer reacting automatically. I was choosing. Finally, I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like someone entering a space that no longer belonged to him. We sat in the living room, the same room where everything had fallen apart. He looked down at his hands for a long time before speaking. "I didn't know about the trust. I know I said." That surprised him. "You do?" "Yes." Another silence. Then he swallowed hard. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know that too." He looked up at me then, confused. "But I still hurt you." That was the first honest thing he had said since this began, and it broke something open in me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. "Yes," I said quietly. "You did." His eyes filled slightly. "I don't know how to fix this." For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be again. The one who asked me why people lied. The one who believed love was simple. "I don't think you fix this quickly," I said. He nodded slowly. "I talked to a counselor," he admitted. "After everything." I couldn't sleep. That surprised me. Not because I didn't believe him, but because I hadn't expected movement. "I don't want to be that person," he said. "That matters," I replied. Another long pause followed. Finally, he asked the question I had been waiting for. "Do you hate me?" My breath caught slightly, because the honest answer wasn't simple. I didn't hate him, but I didn't trust him either, and both truths could exist at the same time. "I don't hate you," I said carefully, "but I can't go back to pretending nothing happened." He nodded immediately. "I understand." And for the first time, I believed he might. When he left that day, it was different from the last time. There was no anger, no authority, no confusion, just distance. Real, necessary distance. That evening, I sat alone again in Daniel's old chair. This time, it wasn't painful. It felt like closure slowly learning to exist inside the same space as memory. I pulled out Daniel's last letter from the drawer and read it one more time. One sentence stayed with me longer than the rest. Do not let guilt make you surrender your freedom. For a long time, I thought freedom meant independence from others. Now I understood something deeper. Freedom is the ability to recognize when love is being used against you and still choose to protect yourself. Outside, the sky was turning soft gold. I placed the letter back gently, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was not surviving my life anymore. I was living it again. Not the life I expected, not the one I lost, but the one I still had the right to claim. Looking back at everything that happened, I've learned something I never understood before. Control doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like help. Sometimes it sounds like I'm doing this for your safety. And sometimes it comes from the people you love the most. I used to believe that family meant trust without question. That a son could never become someone who would slowly take pieces of your independence away while still smiling at you across the dinner table. But life has a way of teaching lessons you never asked for and never wanted to learn. What hurt the most wasn't the passwords being changed or the accounts being locked. It was the feeling of being treated like I was no longer capable of thinking for myself. Like my voice had become optional in my own life. But I also learned something else, something I will carry for the rest of my days. Love does not mean surrendering your dignity. Being a mother does not mean accepting control. And aging does not mean losing your right to choose. Sometimes protecting yourself is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of survival. And sometimes the greatest strength a person can show is simply refusing to disappear quietly. I don't know what the future will hold for me and my son. Healing is not linear, and trust once broken does not return in a single moment. But I do know this: I am no longer afraid to stand in my own life. If this story touched you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced trust being broken within a family? What would you have done in my place? Please leave a comment below and share your feelings. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about family truth and emotional resilience, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means more than you know.